everybody. Welcome back to Caravan of Consciousness. This is episode number 9. Number 9. For those of you that are into the PID and the Beatles conspiracy, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, jokes aside, episode number 9 of Caravan of Consciousness. And I am happy and honoured to have my good friend Mark Devlin join me again on the podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thanks, Amanda. And that's some crazy synchro mysticism there, because I've just recorded this week the intro to Magical Mystery Talk, which is the Beatles related podcast that I do with Matt Sergiu and Desiree Hall, where we get into occult and esoteric aspects of the Beatles. And it just happened to be episode 9. So there I am recording the intro, and I'm saying this is number 9. And then I recorded myself saying that and played it backwards to see if it came out sounding like Turn Me On Dead Man. And I think it did. There's something in it. There's something in that phrase, if it's said correctly, that does end up sounding like Turn Me On Dead Man in reverse. It's a crazy world.
Wow. That's amazing. Yes, I actually tuned into that show. That was an awesome show. And also recently you did a show with Andrew. I can't remember his last name, but it was talking about the symbology and the theme of Christmas and how a lot
Andy
of
Thomas.
Andy Thomas, that's right, and how a lot of different cultures have similar themes with regards to Christmas. Yeah, so seeing as we're a couple of days away from the big day, and so do you still celebrate Christmas, or how do you feel about it now that you're sort of looking at the world in with different eyes than you did probably 10, 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's definitely changed my perception of things, having woken up to certain truths. So I still mark the occasion of Christmas, but it doesn't have the same meaning that it used to. So my family love it. My family love all the decorations and trinkets, and especially the shopping and the food. But that stuff just doesn't mean anything to me anymore. What I appreciate the most about the Christmas season is simply winding down for a bit, just having a few days of chilling, hanging out with the family, just relaxing and taking a bit of a breather, before it all starts again in January. That's the most value for me of this time of year. But I also mentioned in that show that I did with Andy that I feel a connectedness now with the cycles and the passing of the seasons, the cycles of time, which really resonates with me now. So we've just passed the winter solstice in this part of the world. It will be the opposite for you guys over there, not down there, over there. And I felt a real connectedness to that day, 21st of December. I know it sort of varies a little bit and tends to fluctuate, but the 21st is the main pinpoint of the solstice. And that's the point where the days slowly start to get longer and lighter after what we call Christmas Day, the 25th of December, when the sun is seen to have symbolically died on the Southern Cross for 3 days. Remind you of anything?
Yeah.
And then it rises again. The sun, sun of God, is risen again on the 3rd day. So it's all astrotheology. And then in this part of the world, the days start to get slowly longer. And I'm someone who really appreciates the spring and summer months now in a way that I didn't used to. So another thing I mentioned on that show was that many years ago, going back 20, 25 years, I was totally nocturnal because I was a full-time DJ. So I was doing 3 or 4 gigs a week. And on my nights off where I wasn't working, I would stay up till 5, 6 o'clock in the morning so as not to screw my body clock up, because that was my lifestyle at the time. And it didn't bother me then because I wasn't awake to any of the stuff that I know now. I hadn't undergone that conscious experience. And all that really mattered to me in my life was doing parties, doing gigs, playing tunes, and identifying as a DJ. So thinking back now to the way I used to live my life, it's a horrific existence, and I would not want to do it now. Because in the winter months, I was rolling in on a Sunday morning, particularly because I used to do this all-night club in Cardiff, Wales, and then drive back to where I lived near Oxford. That was a 2-hour drive. I would DJ until 6 in the morning because it was an all-nighter, get home at about 8, and then go to bed just as the sun was coming up. And then I would get up at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just as it was getting dark, So actually, I never saw daylight for several months. I was like a bloody vampire.
Yeah.
So that kind of existence would not work for me now. Now I've pulled myself back into sleeping at night, being awake in the day, and it really affects me. These winter months, these short days where it's dark at 4 o'clock, I find it, quite depressing and unsettling sometimes. So I really look forward to the return of the spring months. And the solstice is that marker point where you know that you've made it that far. And from this point on, things are only going to get lighter and the days longer. And that's definitely something to look forward to for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I, as you know, I left England when I was only 7 back in the 1970s, but I do have vague memories. And lucky mum took lots of photos because that triggers a lot of memories as well when you're going back through photos. And I can remember the long, um, dark days of winter.
Oh.
And yeah, trudging through the slush and sludge to get to school and things like that, and it getting dark, when we were on our way home from school.
I don't know if it's the
And
same for you, but when I think back to when I was very young, it's always summers and Christmases that I can remember. The
yeah,
summers are firmly fixed in my mind. I can remember what I was doing in those times because the summers were fun. And
yeah.
and then Christmas, I have memories of Christmas, but nothing of those dry months in between. It's always summers and Christmas that kind of stay with you.
Yes, yeah, because we used to go to Filey or Scarborough, Filey Beach or Scarborough for summer holidays and beach and things like that. Although now that I'm living in Queensland, I look at the beaches here compared to the beach in Filey and Scarborough, and it's just like day and night. But yeah, and I went back in 2012, but it was summertime when I went back, and I couldn't believe how long the days were because I came from North Yorkshire, so that's fairly high up there, and it didn't really get dark at all. Like there was always like a twilight, like the sun would go down and then it seemed to just stay light, from 10, 11 o'clock into 12, 1 in the morning. It might get a little bit darker, and then by 2:33 it was starting to get light again. It was just
Wow.
crazy. And I can remember as a child, going to bed, I had to go to bed because I had school in the morning, and even though we had like block out curtains, but I'd peek out because I could hear the kids over the back that were, maybe 2 or 3 years older, and they were still out playing in the garden. And I thought it was most unfair that I had to go to bed. And it was probably, I think we went to bed about, I don't know, 7:38, and it was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I'm looking out and it
Mm.
was still like daylight. Whereas
Yep.
here in Queensland, where I am, and even when I went to Tasmania, which again, for people that sort of question the nature of where we live, when they're comparing whether we live on a ball or whether we live on a flat earth or in a realm or whatever.
Oh, triggered,
If
triggered.
yes, but if it was a ball, you would think that the same sort of thing would be happening in the northern hemisphere in England would happen in Tasmania.
Right.
But when I have, because my dad moved to Tasmania quite a number of years ago, he passed away in 2020, but before that, I think he was down there for 10 or 11 or 12 years or something. And we visited quite a number of times. But when we went to Tasmania, they do tend to have a little bit more of a twilight than what we have in Queensland, but it's certainly nothing like in England. Whereas if it was this shape, it should be the same down here as it is up there. But
Right.
yeah, obviously in opposite seasons, it would be the opposite, winter and summer, and then summer and winter. But yeah, they don't seem to have quite the same twilight as in England. But anyway,
Mhm.
that's another aside. We sort of got off on a tangent there, but getting us back on track. So talking about Australia, I know you've done a bit of a recap for your audience, but just for people that tune into my podcast, if you want to just speak briefly about how your trip went in Australia back in November, and
Mm.
yeah, just yeah, I'll open up the floor for that.
Okay, well, I had a great time. It was a very fulfilling trip, very worthwhile, very glad that I did it. Never thought that I would. So, going back to 2020, when all the nonsense was happening, it really looked as if I would never be able to leave British shores again. and everyone else felt that way about where they lived. Because we were hearing all about these curtailments of international travel and arms beer passports being required to go from country to country. And it just looked like I would never be able to travel again. And I'm someone who has loved travel through my life. It's a big passion of mine. It's something that's remained because if I think back to before I kind of had my awakening, if I'm going back 20 years or so, the things that really mattered to me were music, movies, and travel. The music and movies really don't mean that much anymore because all I can see when I watch movies now is the programming. And all I can think about when I listen to music is who the artists really were and what agendas they were pushing. But the travel is something that stayed with me. I still love it. And so it was amazing when this window of opportunity opened up in late 2022 and Australia announced that it was opening up its borders again to us filthy, pestilence ridden foreigners, you know? And so I thought, well, I'd better act quickly because I'd wanted to do this speaking tour in March of 2020. And obviously it didn't happen. Really bad timing. So I thought, well, maybe I've got an opportunity now to reschedule it for 2023. And so I spoke with yourself, I spoke with three other event organizers, and we came up with November because we thought that would give us enough time to really put a decent tour together and get all the pieces in place. So we set it for the first week in November, and happily it was able to go ahead. Just a week before that, actually, I was in Las Vegas, which is another trip that I never thought I would be able to undertake because the United States was pretty much the last nation to open up its borders in May of this year, 2023, 11th of May, day before my birthday. And so I got the invitation from Karen B to go out and speak at Flatoberfest in Vegas. And it just turned out to be a week before I had to leave for Australia. So I didn't make myself too popular at home undertaking those two trips so close together. But I never thought I'd be able to get into those countries, especially America. So that was pretty amazing. So the Australia trip was great. I did the four gigs. It was Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, or the suburbs of. And there were a few sort of niggles here and there. So my flight to Sydney, you dropped me off very early in the morning to catch my flight to Sydney. We got up at 5 a.m. and scrabbled to Brisbane Airport. And you dropped me off, and I called you to say that I thought I'd left my bloody laptop bag in your car, but it turns
Yeah.
out I hadn't. Uh, so then I discovered that my flight to Sydney had been cancelled. And so I was thinking, oh God, how am I going to get there in time for the gig? Because the gig kicked off at 1 p.m. But I did manage to find myself another flight. I had to book myself onto a different airline and get to Sydney and then just race straight to the gig. And then coming home, I don't know if you know this, but I missed my flight coming home back to
Yes.
England.
Yes, you did tell me. Yeah.
Total
You were
nightmare because
24 hours too late.
I
And
know,
that's
right?
understandable. Yeah.
Well, you'd think a
Yeah.
seasoned traveler like me would have spotted it, but my return flight home was at 2:25 in the morning, and it was going from Perth to Kuala Lumpur and then on to London Heathrow. So I had it in mind that it's Monday night at 2 a.m. So I got to the airport Monday at about midnight, and the airline said, your flight left 24 hours ago. And I was like, oh shit.
Yep.
Of course, 2:25 on the Monday is Sunday night. So I was 24 hours late. So I had to
Yep.
book myself a new flight home. My original flight was in business class, where I would have been able to at least lay down and try and get some rest. I had to book myself in economy, going via Singapore, and it was an absolute bone crusher. It was 5.5 hours from Perth, 6 hours in Singapore airport, just wandering around, and then 15 hours, 14 hours 50 back to Heathrow in economy, which was absolutely horrific. I paid an astronomical price for it as well. But there you go. It's one of the perils of international travel, I guess. And I do enjoy having these stories, these anecdotes to relate, because again, travel broadens the mind. It's good for the soul, I think. It's a great thing to do. Everyone should do it. I know a lot of Americans who don't even have a passport because they say, well, why do we need to go overseas? We've got everything we need right here in America. Uh, I would just say that everyone should travel if they can and see
Yep.
different cultures, different parts of the world. It's definitely a worthwhile way to spend your life.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, it was great having you down here, as you say, like after what happened in 2020, we never thought it would actually happen. So it was so good to have you
Right.
here.
And we can think about what's caused that, because obviously the plan was, I think, for the borders to remain closed long
Yep.
term. But they didn't. They opened up. And I personally think that is entirely down to the level of pushback and resistance which was shown by courageous Australians in all the different
Yes.
cities, especially Melbourne, because, let's face it, it was heavily tyrannical in Melbourne under
Yep.
Dan Andrews. So all the people of Victoria who took to the streets in 2020 and 2021 and pushed back, I think you won back your freedom and everyone else's by making a very clear demonstration that we do not consent to what's going on. We want no part in it, and we're quite simply not complying. We saw that in different parts of the world. We had a lot of that in London, especially in 2021 with those amazing freedom rallies in May and June. And I think collectively, we have caused the control system to take a step back, reconsider where it goes from here, and it caused them to say, wow, look at all this pushback from the people. I guess we need to kind of open things back up while we consider what our next move is going to be on the grand chessboard. That's personally what I think happened there.
Yep, absolutely. And because so many people woke up too, like people that I knew that I never thought would be awake to so much of what's going on in the world have woken up in the last 3 years, whereas the likes of myself and you and a lot of other people have been going down so many rabbit holes for such a long time, 10, 15, 20 years, some even longer. But finally, there was a big surgence of people that have awoken to, a lot of the stuff that goes on in the world in the last 3 years. So, and I don't think
Right.
they actually realize that that would happen at such a mass level, and that's
Yeah.
probably why the censorship has just been absolutely
Mm.
crazy. Yeah,
Yeah. It was collateral damage that they would have factored into their plans. They would have known that a certain number of people were going to wake up to what was going on and see through the lies and the deceptions and the nonsense. But I think they severely underestimated the numbers. I think
yeah,
we have surprised them in terms of just how many people have stood up and said, we're not having this. And
yeah,
it's great to meet people who have woken up since 2020. I met a whole load of them when I was in Australia. So people were coming up to me and saying, oh, the nonsense caused me to question everything. And now I've gone down about 500 different rabbit holes, and I've done a fast track crash course in truth and conspiracy research. And that's great. I'm meeting people all over the UK that are saying the same thing. And there's something about people when they've just woken up, when they've just realized that their entire life has been a lie, and that those institutions that they thought were on their side and there to help and support them are actually their enemy that is looking to harm them. That creates a fire in someone. It creates a passion and a zeal. I remember what it was like for me. It's just like you've got this flame burning within you, and you feel the need to communicate what you've learned to anyone that will listen, and do whatever you can to oppose the evil and the darkness and stand up for rights and freedom. So we got a whole load of people in the world now who are going through that process. And that's great to see, because it gives the likes of us who've been on this path for many, many years, as you say, a bit of a breather, I guess. We can sort of pass the baton to this new generation, and they can do a bit of the work now. Not to
yeah,
say that we're going to retire and not do what we need to do. We'll never do that. But it's just great that there's new recruits who can do a bit of the spade work and join us out there on the battlefield and, provide some of this pushback.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, with the Australian audiences, did you find, because often, pretty much in line with what you were just saying, those of us that have been on this path for so long, we tended to find ourselves in a bit of an echo chamber for quite some time. But did you find that when you were doing your talks, even in America and over here in Australia, that people were coming across your information and your research for the first time?
Absolutely. I found that in Vegas just before I got out to Australia. I was quite surprised by the amount of people that were coming up to my book table and they were saying, "Oh, wow, what are these books about?" And I was like, "Well, it's the true nature of the music industry and what it's really used for." And they're like, "Wow, wow, this is amazing." And I'm thinking, "Wow, you guys don't know this, really?" And then I got a bit more of that in Australia in some of the talks. There were points where I was presenting some of my information and you could have heard a pin drop, to use that cliche, and there were jaws dropping to the floor. You could hear people gasping, going, "Wow." And again, I was thinking, oh, I thought everyone knew this, but I guess they don't. So when you're so close to this information yourself and you live and breathe it every day, I think you can assume that everyone else knows what you know, and you can forget that people are at different levels of their truth research. And maybe there's a lot of people who haven't gone down the particular rabbit holes that you have. And I've found that by presenting information about the music industry, I can really engage people in reconsidering their entire worldview. And uh, it's a great catalyst to get people into sort of truth, conspiracy, freedom research by sparking that interest within them through the music stuff, because everyone loves music of some kind. And when
Yep.
you start talking about bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Doors and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Queen, all these groups that everyone knows, Prince, Madonna, Michael Jackson, people like this, you really get people's attention. And there's a whole load of stuff there. And I don't need to sensationalize it. I don't need to embellish it in any way. I don't need to make it fantastic or controversial because it's all right there in the information. I merely present truth, and everything that I do present can be backed up. So I'll talk about the circumstances surrounding, for instance, the death of Michael Hutchence from In Excess in 1997. Everything that I presented in those talks was based in fact and can be verified and backed up by evidence which is freely available to everyone. I didn't create any kind of over sensationalism at all. And so it is a great way of engaging people in a different kind of thought process. I've been very successful with it. I seem to have created a niche for myself because I'm that guy. I'm that guy that speaks about the music industry. You know, there's lots of folk out there that talk about big pharma and the world of medicine, natural health, homeopathy, holistic medicine. There's a lot of people that speak about political, geopolitical machinations and all the stuff that goes on there. There's people that talk about the financial system and they get into crypto and the illusory nature of so-called money and all this stuff. And they all do great work in their own respective areas. I'm that guy that pitches in with my contributions about the music industry, what it's really used for, and I'm bringing my piece of the puzzle to the table. So the picture is never complete without my piece of the puzzle, and it's never complete without the pieces of the puzzle that all these other folk bring to the table. So together we get the job done. And I'm just happy to be able to play my part in it because I now know what my mission is. It's very clear to me. And I stay in my lane and do what I know I came here to do.
Yeah. And I think with the entertainment and music industry too, that's probably the biggest part of most people's lives because not everybody is into, the geopolitical uh, subjects, that they're people, a lot of people stay away from religion. What do they say when you go to a party? Do not talk about religion and politics, please.
Yeah.
But everybody listens to music or watches movies or TV or listens to the radio. It would be very rare that somebody just goes through their life without having those influences in their life. So probably what you do is as important, if not more important, because it touches everybody on a more personal level. Whereas, as I say, not everyone's into politics, not everyone is into pharmaceuticals or into, unless they've got people they know or themselves are having health crises and have to deal with those systems. But pretty much everybody gets in their car and turns on the radio or sticks, like if they're old school like me, sticks the CD in or, you know, or watches TV. I mean, I don't watch TV. I haven't watched TV for years, but occasionally, just even for me to be able to switch off, I'll watch a movie. I'm very particular these days, and I tend to look at them with very different eyes, and I start to see the
too.
symbology and the symbolism and the agendas behind the messages. But sometimes it's just nice to sit and relax. But I guess, yeah, what I'm saying is I think the entertainment and music industry is probably the biggest um, piece of the puzzle, really, because it affects everybody on such a personal level.
Right. And I do occasionally get into movies and TV shows and other aspects of popular culture and entertainment because it's all connected. It has to be. There's no way the music industry can be sick and debased and degraded and pushing certain agendas if the TV industry and the film industry and games and everything else isn't pushing the same agendas. There's no way that particular genre could have flown under the radar. If we're going to be sensible and mature about it, we have to accept that every aspect of our lives is currently controlled and are geared towards pushing the same agendas. I mean, look at some of the stuff that's coming through music now, particularly the forms of music that I used to play in the clubs. So back in the day, it was called R&B, hip hop, urban music. They still use those tags, but the forms of it's not even music in my view, it's just noise that passes for those genres these days, is blatantly pushing the same agendas that you'll see in TV, in advertising, in movies. It's transgenderism, that whole push towards the inversion of the genders and androgyny. This is all part of the long-term plan for population reduction and creating androgynous humans. uh, it's an agenda. That's what it is. And it can be shown to be so. Also, transhumanism and AI, and this idea that technology is the future and that humanity is going to merge itself with technology and AI is going to take over our lives. These agendas are being pushed through music, through so called hip hop and rap, particularly. So you see the same things getting pushed in all these other walks of life. And that is not a coincidence. It's proof that these are all coordinated agendas, and the entertainment industry is a great way of getting these ideas across. It's targeted at the subconscious mind of the masses. It attacks them when their guard is down because they think they're just relaxing, chilling out, listening to some music, watching a movie, unwinding after a hard day at work. You don't realize that your mind is being put into an alpha brainwave state in many cases, particularly through TV, and it makes you very suggestible to subliminal messages communicated through these popular culture vehicles. So that's the way they get so many people through entertainment. A lot of people find politics boring, dry, and dusty. A lot of people feel the same way about finance and banking. It's boring. But people love movies and music. That's not
Yep.
boring. That's fun. That's what people like to do with their time. So it's the perfect way of getting into the minds of so many people. And when you can point it out to them and demonstrate how they've been mind controlled, how they've had their perceptions and their thoughts shaped and molded for them, it's a real revelation to people. And
Yep.
when you can demonstrate how it was done, they'll never be fooled in the same way again because the conscious mind has been engaged. Now they're paying attention. Now they know how the trick was done and it will never work again. So
Yep.
that's an important part of my work, demonstrating the methods and the tactics that they use. There are many other researchers doing great work in this area as well. And we're making slow progress. We're getting there. It's not happening anywhere near as fast enough as I would like, but then I've never been renowned for my patience.
Yep.
But the analogy that I use is we are on a path, a journey, and there's a great big rock blocking the road. And we can't go any further until that rock has been removed. It's too big to pick up. So, what we have to do is chip away at it with hammers and chisels.
Yep.
And if one person is doing that, it's going to take forever. If a small handful of people are doing it, it's going to take a bloody long time. But if many, many people pick up a hammer and a chisel and start chipping away at that rock, there's going to come a point where we get the damn thing removed. So we just need more and more people to pick up hammers and chisels, get to work on that rock, and when it's removed, then we can continue on our journey.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's definitely we've definitely made a big dent in that rock in the last few years for sure. Yeah. And what you were saying about the music and the movie industries, they sort of go hand in hand because a lot of the music artists become actors and the actors become music artists, and as you say, pretty much across the board, anyone in those industries, a lot of them are lifetime actors anyway.
Right, right.
So, yeah. So, as well as your musical truth books, which I've got here in Australia, so anyone in Australia and New Zealand that wants to purchase copies of Mark's books, I've got Musical Truths 1, 2, and 3 available to post out here within Australia and New Zealand. But also, you have done 2 novels. So I read The Cause and the Cure a couple of years ago, or probably 3 years ago. I think 2020 that came out, didn't it? The Cause and the
Late 2019.
Oh, yes, yes. So early 2020, I think, was when I read that. I'm now rereading it again. As you can see, I've got a bookmark in there
Oh,
just
great.
to touch up on, to refresh my memory because you recently released The Gift and the Curse, which is the sequel to The Cause and the Cure. And again, I've
Right.
got copies of these here if anyone wants them. So, do you want to talk a little bit about your new release?
Sure. So I embarked on the path of fiction writing in 2019. I'd written the 2 musical truth books by that point, and I decided that I'd like to have a go at writing fiction. I'd never done it before, but I thought it offers a great way of communicating some empowering truths, but without having to back them up with citations and references, which I'd done in the 2 musical truth books. So I thought, well, you can just put anything into a so called fiction narrative and literally put words into the mouths of your characters and steer the story in any direction you want. You're the god of your own world when you're a fiction writer, which is probably how these sick, satanic, psychopathic elites feel about their role in the world in their mistaken, arrogant way. But I really enjoyed this process, creating characters out of nowhere, although many of them are based on certain individuals that I've known in my life. There are aspects of my own character and personality that I've put onto some of the characters in the book. So I set the first story in Oxford, which is where I grew up. It is, of course, Illuminati Central. It's where all the so-called elite types go to get their system indoctrination and training. And it's got a lot of occult, arcane aspects to it, a lot of history, a lot of things have gone on there. It's a very fascinating city in which to set a story, which is why the Inspector Morse novels and TV shows were set in Oxford, because you can do a lot in that city. And I just happen to know it very well because I grew up there, started DJing there, and I set the story in the early 90s, 1990 and 1991. That was a period where I myself had just started working at a radio station, which was called Fox FM. So in the book, I've changed that to Lux FM, but it's very clearly based on my experiences at Fox. And I created this character, Verity Hunter. Her name literally means truth seeker. So Verity from Veritas in the Latin, and then Hunter is somebody that's seeking something. And there are aspects of my own personality that I've put onto her. So she's a black female, whereas I'm obviously a white male. And I just wanted to set myself the challenge of imagining what the world might be like from that person's perspective. Just thought it'd be too easy to have a white male as the central character. So I was very happy with how that story turned out. It was layered, so there was lots of symbolism, allegory, metaphor. I learned about that largely from watching the films of Stanley Kubrick. So Stanley used to have a surface narrative, which was the exoteric for the masses. So, for instance, Eyes Wide Shut, his final film, we're told, is about sexual jealousy between a married couple. That's what the masses were told. That's all it is. It's just Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and they're getting jealous about each other's sexual experiences. But actually, Eyes Wide Shut is about a lot more than that. It tells us about the world of these so-called elites. It demonstrates how they operate, particularly the occult ritual which takes place. These things are very real, and Stanley knew this, which is why he put it into the movie. And there are lots of other coded elements as well. There's a guy named Sean McCann, good friend of mine in America, who's done many shows decoding the films of Kubrick. So I was just amazed at how much Stanley was able to put under that surface layer. I mean, The Shining is another movie of his, which has a surface narrative. This guy, caretaker in this desolate hotel in the middle of winter, goes a bit crazy and tries to attack his family with an axe. That's the surface narrative, but there's a lot more to The Shining than that. So I tried to put that into the narrative of my first novel. Then I wrote Musical Truth Volume 3 during the scamdemic, during those crazy years. 2021 is when that came out. And then I thought, well, for the next book, I would like to do the follow-up to The Cause and the Cure. I'd like to just escape into the world of fiction again. I think I need that. I think it's very cathartic for me to just have that release for some of this information. So I went down that road again. I've put out The Gift and the Curse. The title is based on an album title from Jay-Z, who's an artist I've had my eye on for quite a few years. But I thought it's a great title, The Gift and the Curse. And it refers to what it's like to accumulate this knowledge of what the world is really all about. It's a gift in that it's liberating. And if the purpose of our lives here on earth is to discover truth and stand up against evil and darkness, then it's a gift to come across this information. But it's also a curse. So we live in a world of duality, of course, where one thing can't exist without its polar opposite. So in order for good and love and light to exist in the world, there has to be evil and darkness and fear to counter it at the other end of the scale. And that's reflected in the title. So the gift and the curse part is that's how it can feel sometimes also to know these things about the world. So you realize that darkness and evil currently has a stranglehold over humanity and has done for a very long time. It can affect your enjoyment, as we said, of things like music and movies, because you realize it's all controlled. You realize that actually your favorite bands were just pushing agendas and they were owned, they were puppets. You realize that many of your favorite movies are communicating hidden messages and pushing predictive programming and stuff like this. So from that point of view, it can feel like a curse. So that's why I picked that title. The new story is set in 2001 in September, starts off in September, and it runs through to November of that year. It was a bit of a slow year for news, nothing really happened
No.
in September 2001. You know, it was a bit dry.
Yeah.
Of course, it's set in the aftermath of 9/11, the attacks in America, and the central plot of my story involves the main characters. So there's six of them. There's three men and three women, so a nice balance there. It's a team of six, and they have to come together to prevent this terrible event, which is planned to unfold in Oxford on the British version of 9/11. So the way we express dates in the UK, 9/11 comes out as 9th of November. And the characters realize that the Order, as I've called them, this is the secret society network, which is all pervasive and which dominates all of Oxford society. And that's a metaphor for what happens all over the world. We've got this so-called elite ruling class, the parasites, the control system, who control every aspect of everyone's life pretty much all over the world. It will be no different in Australia to Brazil, Norway, South Africa, any country you might care to mention. The banking system is controlled, the entertainment is controlled, academia is controlled. So that's reflected in the Order, who control every aspect of Oxford society. And they're planning this event to take place on the 9th of November, and it involves blowing up one of the most iconic buildings in Oxford, which is known as the Radcliffe Camera. and blaming it on Muslim terrorists, what else, to capitalize on the fear and the paranoia that's been brought about by 9/11. And then they'll use this event as an excuse to plunge Oxford into a nightmarish totalitarian lockdown where all freedoms are curbed and every aspect of everyone's movements is surveilled, monitored, and tracked. Can't think where I got that idea from. You know, pure
No.
fiction. I just plucked it out of the air. So that's the idea behind the new novel. It catches up with many of the same characters that were in The Cause and the Cure 10 years on, 1 decade on. And a subplot, when you get below the sort of terrorist part of the plot, involves many of the characters doing some soul searching and facing up to some personal demons, uh, coming to terms with past traumas. So I've got some flashback chapters where the reader will be going along, and at the start of each chapter, it's got the date. So it's like September 2001, October 2001, June 1977. And you're like, what? June 1977? What's going on? And then you realize that you've gone back to Verity's childhood. And there's an event which took place in 1977 involving her parents, which has contributed towards the character that she's taken on as an adult. And there are flashback chapters for May, set in 1979, Keith, set in 1980, and going way back, Max Zeal in 1967. And all of these flashbacks tell you something about what has caused these individuals to turn out the way they have. It's affected their lives. And it's the same for all of us.
Yep.
It's trauma, it's events which have caused us to become the adults that we are. And it usually involves our parents, it usually involves things that have happened in childhood. And I've tried to reflect that in the story. So I've gone very deep into some of these characters and just shown them to be struggling. They're vulnerable, they've got frailties, they've got faults, as we all have. And I thought that was an interesting road to go down with these characters.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I look forward to reading it. I was hoping to get it done before we had our chat tonight, but yeah, it's just been so crazy hectic here. So as I said, I'm only halfway through The Cause and the Cure again, because after reading it a couple of years ago, I just wanted to brush up before I read your new one. But I'm looking forward to it, and I guess there would be a stark difference too between, because I'm thinking myself like from 1990 to 2001, so much in society had changed, because in 1990 not everybody had computers, not everybody had mobile phones, people were still banging away on typewriters, they were using
Exactly.
cartridges or tape decks and boom
Yeah,
boxes and things like
that's right.
that. Yeah, and so in those years it was only like that decade really that introduced so many new things. We quickly went from vinyl and tapes to CDs,
Mm,
and we went from VHS to DVDs, and then everybody started getting a home computer.
yeah,
Even before the laptop, we'd have the old tower computers with the monitors and things like that.
yeah.
Yeah, just such a acceleration of the way of life, and devices, I guess, in those 10 years too.
Well, that's something I really wanted to enhance in the stories. So I really homed in on that in the first book, set in 1990, based on my own memories. So I started working in this radio station at the time, and I did everything on reels of tape because it was before computers came in. So I learnt to edit on reels of tape, where you would take a razor blade and slice little bits of tape out and then discard them and then join the two bits of tape together with some sticky tape. That's the way everyone worked in those days. The daytime radio DJs on the station at the time used to play the music off of 7-inch vinyl singles. And the journalists in the newsroom were bashing away at typewriters, and the news bulletins were coming through on fax. Remember fax? But
Yep.
then I stayed at that station until 1996. And by the time I left in 96, computers were in. So by that point, the daytime DJs were playing everything, the weather, the news bulletins, the jingles, and the songs off of screen computers. So this was paving the way for smartphones where you just touch screens and everyone just gets used to touching screens and dragging icons around. So back in 96, the DJs on the station were just pressing buttons on this screen to get all the stuff to fire. So that was a big change. And by the time we got to 2001, fax was pretty much gone. It was email by that point. I think most people were still on dial-up internet, which
Yes, I
was
remember that
crazy.
sound.
Remember that? Remember all those whirs and bings and pops as it was firing up?
Yep. And if
And it would
anybody
take,
else got a phone call, it would drop you out, so you'd
yeah.
have to log back
And
in later.
and it took about 5 hours to download an MP3 song.
Yep.
But I think at that time, the technology that we had today was already perfected. It was already developed. They were
Yep.
just holding on to it. They wanted us to plod through those slow, painful dial-up years so that when they introduced broadband and Wi-Fi and said, isn't it wonderful? Now you don't have to wire up your computer or your phone. You can just tap into this network that's everywhere. It's just floating around. By that point, people were so grateful for it because it just sped everything up and made their lives more convenient. I think that's the way they were doing it. So they were probably having a good old laugh at us all
Yep.
in 2000, 2001, as we were living in the caveman era.
Yep.
You know,
Problem,
pretty
reaction,
much.
solution. They they caused the problem. We reacted, and then, oh, we've got the solution here. We've got way better technology. Yeah.
That's right. And
Yeah.
again, I think it's a gift and a curse. You know, it's a gift that we've got Wi-Fi because it's so convenient. You can go into a pub or a bar or a restaurant and just tap into their Wi-Fi if you've got some work to do. I don't use a smartphone myself, but everyone else does. And I'm sure they find it very convenient that there's Wi-Fi everywhere. But it can be seen as a curse in that many health professionals will tell us that it's not a great idea to be bathing in all these EMF frequencies and
Yep.
microwave radiation and radio waves and all the rest of it. So that's everywhere now. And it's
Yep.
shocking. If you go into a city like London, right into the heart of London, and you've got your laptop, I mean, I'm old school, so I just take a MacBook everywhere I go. But when I try and tap into a Wi Fi network, you can find that there's like 30 or 40 of them. So there's that many signals. And imagine what it's like in an airport. In an
Yep.
airport, you've got text going back and forth. I've just landed. I'll meet you at the cafe, whatever. And so all that's happening. Then you've got all the communication between the airlines and air traffic control. That's all signals that are going everywhere and Wi-Fi networks and all the rest of it. And all of that is being soaked up by our bodies, by our tissue. It's going into our brains. Uh, and it's not great for us health wise, but we've come to just get used to it. It's very difficult to see how that's going to be reversed now because of the convenience aspect that people have latched onto.
Yep.
So, from that point of view, it can be seen to be a curse. So, I think we see gifts and curses everywhere, actually.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I take lots of precautions. Like I wear the um is this shungite, I think this is, or no, yeah, shungite, and I've got
Looks like
organite.
shungite, yeah.
Yeah, shungite, yeah, and I've got organite, and I've got crystals of black obsidian, and I also put corks all the way around the modem because apparently the cork can absorb a lot of the EMFs too. So there are things we can do to sort of um, cut down on the amount of
Minimize the damage. Yeah.
minimize. Yeah, yeah. So there are certain things that we can do. So and so following on from that, um, if we bring the conversation around to solutions, so we've gone down all the rabbit holes. We've realised that the world isn't the way that we were presented it for much of our lives or most of our lives for a lot of us. So and you've started to expose, as a lot of people have, these truths. But if we just stay there, as I say, we run the risk of being in an echo chamber, or we can also get ourselves bogged down. So what are some of the things that you do to sort of keep yourself a bit more uplifted, like what spiritual practices or what health and other regimes that you do to try and keep yourself a bit upbeat and not fall down with all that heavy information that you're sort of absorbing?
Right. I'm not necessarily the best role model for anyone to follow. in that regard. I've got certain things that work for me, but I'm a work in progress and I'm very flawed in many ways. But there are certain measures that I take to try and stay on track. As you say, if you wallow in this material for too long, conspiracy stuff, it can start to feel very dense, very heavy. It really starts to weigh down on your soul. So you have to balance it out. Personally, I really enjoy doing my Sound of Now show that I put out every Saturday on Mixcloud. It's 2 hours of very, very uplifting, positive, feel good, soulful house. So, soulful house music is pretty much the only genre that I can stand to listen to anymore in terms of new music. But it's fortunate that that scene is full of these very inspirational records, and I dig them out every week, put 2 hours worth of material out, and it really helps me. I find it really useful to just escape into this music, and I can just feel my soul getting uplifted by it. So that's something that works for me. In terms of looking after my health, I do take certain supplements which I think do help to keep me healthy. I don't really get colds anymore. I did get ill in 2021 for about 2 weeks, but a lot of people that I know did. Something was happening then. This was October 21. I don't know if it was chemtrails. I don't know if it was 5G radiation, but a lot of people that I know got very sick then. But other than that, I stay generally healthy. So I take vitamin D3, I take zinc, I take flaxseed capsules. I take multivitamins as well, and I think all that helps me. But in terms of what other people do, they're probably better examples than me. And if we're thinking about solutions and where we move forward from here, the answer has to lie in people power, in the numbers.
Yeah.
Because one benefit that we do have over our enemy is that we've got the numbers. And as we were saying earlier in the conversation, they've discovered this to their detriment, I would suggest, over the past few years. They overreached, they got too ambitious, and it backfired on them. It bit them on the arse
Yep.
because too many people started resisting. And it's a great example of what can be achieved if we do come together collectively. It can only occur when enough people start that catalytic reaction.
Yep.
But we can look at things like 15-minute cities. They're trying to introduce those now as further curbs on our freedoms, and it's not going too well. You know, a lot of these places in the UK where they're trying to roll these 15-minute cities out, there are major delays. They're falling behind on their schedule. Local residents are coming together to form groups and coalitions to oppose what's being proposed. It's not going too well in Oxford, which was one of the blueprint cities for this idea. So that's great. We've just got to keep that going. Keep the resistance stepped up. Never think that the threat has gone away, which I think a lot of people have probably perceived, because there's no overt threat to our freedoms
Mm.
anymore, because we
Yep.
can go to cafes, pubs, and restaurants and travel around freely. A lot of people seem to think that the danger has gone away. It hasn't, unfortunately. They've merely stepped back into the shadows. I'm sure they're sitting around various tables and discussing what they're going to do next. So the threat is merely going to present itself in different ways. And we're going to have to find ways of resisting and pushing back against that. But I'm very encouraged to see so many groups being formed, so many people coming together to pool their knowledge, so many people doing things like lobbying their MPs. Many people will say, well, that's a waste of time because they just do what they want anyway. But at least it shows them, demonstrates a very clear
Mm.
and direct message
It
that
sends a
people are not
message.
buying. Yeah, people are not
Yep.
buying the bullshit anymore. And people
Yep.
people said the same thing about the freedom rallies, the marches, you know. They were like, it doesn't change anything. There's no point. Absolutely not. It changed a
Mm.
whole lot.
It did.
1 million
Absolutely.
people walking through the streets of London cannot be ignored.
Yep.
BBC News will tell you it was 400 people, but
Hmm.
anyone that was there knows that it was at least 1 million.
Yep.
And they know this.
Yeah.
They would
We
have seen it.
we had the same thing here in Australia, like the
Right.
numbers, because I went to a few of them too, and the numbers were just absolutely unbelievable. But yet,
Right.
what you saw on the 6 o'clock news was absolute BS, like a few
Yeah. Yeah.
hundred or maybe 1,000 people, and you'd probably had 200 to 500,000 at some of them,
That's right.
maybe even close to a million at some of the cities like Melbourne and Sydney.
So that's
Yeah.
another thing. Just imagine if there was somebody new to all of this that has just been had their consciousness sparked by the convid nonsense, and they might have attended one of these freedom rallies just to see what was going on, and they've seen the colossal number of people. They know themselves that there's hundreds of thousands, if not a million people at this march. Then they go home and turn on the BBC Evening News and they tell you it's 400 people. That's
Yeah.
further reason for them to think, hang on a minute, they're
Yeah.
lying to us. They're lying.
Yeah.
I know there was way more than 400 people. So that's a reason for anyone, in that position to come to terms with the fact that the media lies all the time.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's an ongoing process. I'm very happy that it's underway, but we're chipping away at that metaphorical rock, and like I
Yeah.
said, we just need more people to pick up those hammers and
Exactly.
chisels.
And people
Mm,
have got to realize too that, I know a lot of people think, oh, I'm only one person. What difference could I make? But if everybody felt that way, well, then nothing would get done. But you're
that's right.
right. We all need to do something. Like recently, I sent an email to our federal member because they're trying to roll out the digital ID, and it's in Parliament at the moment, waiting, sitting in the Senate to be voted on. So, yeah, I encourage anybody out there in Australia, like, if you don't want every single thing monitored and you don't want to be locked into this dystopian system, we all need to have our voices heard. And it can be as simple as just sending a quick email of 1 or 2 lines that, I do not consent to this. Yeah, but you have to let them know, because if you don't say anything, that's seen as tacit
Yeah.
consent.
I mean,
Yeah,
they're never going to say, "Oh shit, Amanda McLeod objects to this," or "Mark Devlin objects to this. We'd better roll it back." But they
yeah,
are going to say, "Well, there's a lot of people out there that aren't buying the bullshit. Damn!"
yeah,
And then they're
exactly.
going to report back to their betters in the control system that, "Oh God, do you know how many emails I've had this week? I've had like
Yeah,
5,000 emails from people saying they're not having this. We're going to have trouble pushing this one through." So it does send a message.
yeah,
And I'm sure they must be scrabbling around desperately in the background thinking, well, how the hell are we going to push this through if they're not buying it? We've got to find new ways. And as they find new ways of trying to push their agendas through, we find new ways of opposing it. As I
yeah,
say, we've got the numbers.
exactly.
We've got the mind power, the consciousness, and the action if it's applied. It just relies on large numbers of people coming together, working together, putting down all the bullshit, all the differences, all the backstabbing, the finger pointing, the ego, letting all that go and just saying to ourselves, what do we want to achieve here? We want to achieve freedom for ourselves and our
Yep,
children's generation and every generation that follows. All the petty squabbling and the bullshit can be put to one side for the moment, come back to it later if we need to. Right now, let's come together because the one thing that unites us is that we want freedom
mm-hmm.
and we can have it
Yep,
if enough of us want it and if we engage ourselves with the work that needs to be done.
yep, exactly.
Very
Yep,
clear.
yeah. And also too, I think there's a resurgence of, um like, people tapping into their spiritual, like doing things on a spiritual level too that are also helping. So it's good to do these physical things like, writing to MPs and going to community meetings and things like that, but also getting your own spiritual life in order. And when we raise our vibration, I know it sounds cliche and it sounds all new agey, and a lot of people go, "Oh my God, new age," and I get that the whole new age thing was part of the system and the psyop as well. But true spirituality means that we need to take responsibility for ourselves and our own soul and our own life. Um, but the more of us that do that and become aware on a spiritual level, we can raise the vibration, and that in turn helps to, it's like that dark versus light, good versus evil, because the evildoers of their voices have been heard so strongly for such a long time, and then the light seems to have got dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. But it's now time that we actually turn the lights back on, shine the light on the darkness, and then that's going to help, bring back balance, because we'll never completely eradicate the dark, but it's a balancing act of the polar opposites. But the scales have definitely tipped one way, and it's time to get equilibrium back again. So, yeah, just before we wind up, what are your thoughts on that on a spiritual level?
Yeah, totally. That's a part of the process that has to take place, and it does take place. With myself, I came into this sort of research with all the heavy conspiracy stuff early on. So I came to realize that the music industry is controlled and that the world is not what we thought it was, and it's not run by the people or the institutions that we thought it was. And in those early years, it was all about dates, places, methods, tactics that were used. But as I continued on my journey, it started to take me into these spiritual, metaphysical realms. And I came to realize that you need to look much, much deeper than just the conspiracy facts into the nature of this reality, what it is, what we're doing here, what we are, what our life journey is all about. And that just tends to push you down that spiritual path. Others might come to it the opposite way round. So they'll come to realize that they're not the identity that they've gone by all their lives. They're not this flesh and blood body. There's so much more to them than that. There's a spiritual aspect. They come from the spirit world. They're aspects of the one, the consciousness, the source, the divine. And then later down that path, they'll put together the pieces of how this conspiracy and this so-called 3D reality really works. But one way or another, if you're going to go the whole way, you're going to have to embrace both aspects, the conspiracy sort of factual stuff, uh, and the spiritual aspect, the non-physical aspect to this reality.
Yep.
And like I was saying earlier on, I just feel a connectedness now with the passing of the seasons, the time of the year, with nature. I love walking in nature. I love going to beaches. If I ever get the opportunity to go to a beach and I'm the only one there just sitting on a rock looking out to sea, I did that a couple of times in Scotland, uh, your spiritual home this year.
Yes.
I found a couple of beautiful beaches, and it was evening, dusk was just setting in, and there was nobody else around. And I was just able to sit and look out to sea, listen to the waves lapping against the shore, and just contemplate, meditate. It's the closest I ever get to meditation. And it's a beautiful thing. It's great for the soul. And so many people that you speak to that have embarked on this truth discovery journey tell you that they now respect nature, the natural world, so much more than they did. And they're now in touch with their spiritual side and their true nature within this reality. So I think if you're genuine, uh, then that is something that's going to happen to you sooner or later. And you just let nature take its course. You trust the universe. Not going to say trust the plan, but you trust the process, and you just allow yourself to be guided and steered in certain directions if you've got the faith to let that process happen. And it can be a wonderful thing. It can be very liberating, and it just puts a whole different perspective on your life, what you're here to do, because things don't end when you croak out your last breath and your body dies. It's clearly not the end. We transcend that, we go beyond it, and we need to spend the opportunity that we've got in these lives considering what's going to happen beyond that process. And we
Yep.
just need to be able to exit this reality when our time comes, whenever that may be, knowing that we did the best we could with clear consciences.
Yep.
And if you can do that, then I think you stand yourself in pretty good stead for whatever lies beyond.
Yep. Exactly. Because I think most of us, if we really think about it, we have always had a feeling that we came here um, to do great things, or to do or to come at a certain time where big things were happening. I know I've felt that my entire life, that um, I was here to either witness something big or be part of something big. And I think a lot of people are really feeling that.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine the number of people around the world who in March 2020 would have gone, my God, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. This is why I came here.
Yeah.
It's starting now, right now, here and now. This is why I'm here.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right, well, we better wind up because I know you're very busy, and it's getting on here. I've got to go and do a late dinner. So, yeah, we're a couple of days out
I'm having
from,
my breakfast.
yes. Yes, this time thing. Yeah, the 10 hours between. Yeah. So, Well, have a great holiday or time off, and I guess you're going to be hitting the ground running in well, I call it the new year, but 2024. Um, I
Yep,
tend to
I
think the
am.
new year actually happens in April. But for the system that we're in at the moment, yeah, January is the new year. So you've got some things coming up in January, I guess. But yeah, just have a great break. And
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, and we'll touch base,
Have a
sort of.
great Barbie.
Yes, yeah. Yep, it's very different. As I said before we actually started recording, it's very different here in Australia. Christmas is sort of cold cuts and salads, whereas you're having all the roast and yeah, all those that celebrate are having the roast and all the hot food and everything. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
but I think the thing that connects us all is just having some downtime and some family time. I really cherish family time, and for me, that's the focus of this, festive season for me is just getting together with the family. And
sure.
yeah. All right, Mark. Well, thanks again for joining us. And don't forget, everyone, if you want
No worries.
copies of Mark's books, Musical Truth, Volumes 1, 2, 3, and his uh, novels, The Cause and the Cure, and The Gift and the Curse. I've got them here. So you can contact me at my email, which I'll put in the description. It's a_McLeod, MCLEOD, 7 @hotmail.com. Or you can contact Mark as well. You can go to his YouTube channel or his website, and then he can direct any traffic to me for anyone that wants to purchase his books here in Australia. All right, Mark, well, have a great downtime and love to the family, and we'll talk soon.
Yep. Cheers, Amanda. Thanks for getting me back on. All the best to you and yours, and hopefully reconnect with you again soon.
Yep, no
Cheers.
worries. Great. Thank you. Bye, everyone, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Festive Season, whatever it is you do. Wishing you all well and blessings and great family time.